Okay, my name is Enrique Jaime Kolbeck. I am air traffic controller. I work on Mexico Airport, International Airport, named Benito Juarez. I'm a controller since 25 years ago. And the Mexico Control Center have sightings with a lot of aircrafts and this kind of things, this kind of phenomenon. Suddenly, they don't have a specially way to appear, just appears suddenly and frequently crossing tracks of the flies, the flight of the exposes on or screen, and sometimes goes with them closer, and the pilots scare us sometimes, nervous first, and then scare, give us information about it. Who is that kind of object flying with us? Or require traffic information in case that this phenomenon pass and happen very quickly in front of them. Because we don't have any kind of control about it, this kind of phenomenon, of course, and the pilots definitely feels in some way, ¿cómo se dice inseguros? Insecure, yes, about the control that it has around of the aircraft. Or flying saucers. And in the past, that results, to hear that in the past results very funny. Today it's very serious for us, especially after the incident that we have with Aeromexico Fly 109, I think. I'm not sure. Well, but 4 years ago, more or less, we have an incident very dangerous with an unidentified object flying in a static fly over the World Trade Center building. It's in a very important building or city. It's located in the final track of the runway of the final of the runway is 5 on the Mexico airport. This fly, we have working with them and coming from Guadalajara to Mexico, and I passed the control of this aircraft to the other controller in a point named Paz de G. That point is the beginning of the one of the arrivals that we have there for runway 5 precisely. And we saw in the screen two objects, two echoes, very close of the aircraft in that moment, but very suddenly and quickly, and disappear immediately. We have radar contact apparently more or less 30 seconds, no more, and the aircraft, it doesn't report nothing about it. I mean, the pilot doesn't report nothing. Then we knew about that this aircraft in the final approach track, in the final turn, has some kind of trash or was hitting, how do you say, golpeado? Hitting in his principal landing gear in the right side, I think. I'm not sure, for this kind of situation, this kind of objects. It's important that you know that we received information 2 hours ago, more or less, by different ways, and information about the people that was watching that phenomenon flying static over the building, then authorities that was answering about that, what kind of aircraft is flying there, Of course, nobody knows nothing about it, know nothing about it. And then we know something about that the hitting of this object, and was very, very dangerous for us, for the responsibility that represents, but because we need to know everything that be flying in our airspace. Of course, we have that we have the pilot's reports and sightings at the same time in the radar.
You do?
Yes. We had reports, a lot of reports, about objects flying in the very close to the final track, about 5 or 4 miles on final of the runway 05. It's very curious that we have information about of that point precisely. In that week, we had about 7 reports of pilots at different times. To have traffic inside, unknown traffic, of course. And it's important that you know that appears in our, that things appear in our screen just like an point in a digital way. And they move definitely very, very fast. The human aircrafts, I mean, talking about now Boeing 727, Boeing 757, moves in a different way, and of course his speed is completely different. It's very reduced in that condition. And when you have the view of the airspace and this screen, the distance between that kind of moments represents around 20 or 30 miles in a second. That is very rare. And of course, nothing compared with the other or the human aircrafts. See, I'm very, yes, completely suddenly, and they turns almost 90 degrees in a second or in a half second. Of course, about of the pilot that he is watching, and he said sometimes we have a bright light, very bright in front of us, flying opposite or is static in static flight, and we have the same detection there. It appears, or this kind of phenomenon appears, sometimes 12 times a day, 12 times at the month, or at the week. And you don't have information about these objects 3 or 4 months, and then appear suddenly and frequently. That is very vertical quickly, yes. And turns, his turns are completely different of the aircraft, turning in this way, or 90 degrees turn, or descend immediately in a diagonal way to very close to the mountains. No, that is very different, completely different. And completely different, of course, of the military aircrafts also.
How have these sightings?
But this phenomenon, of course, doesn't count with a flight plan. Nobody knows nothing about them. Appears when they want to appear. They cross the track of the of the aircrafts with any kind of respect. They don't. Perhaps they. But it is very dangerous sometimes. The pilots turns to be hungry, or scared and require immediately information. What is that? And we have information. What was the aircraft doing? Many things.
Have they reported in?
A lot of pilots in reports when immediately to have an sighting, to have problems with his instruments of flight, precisely the electronic instruments. How close? Around 5 miles, 2 miles in some cases. It's very close for an aircraft, and dangerous, because the pilot doesn't know nothing about that. What is going to do the other pilot? Well, in this case, no?
For how many?
Well, until I have information and we pay all my attention in this kind of phenomena, it's precisely 7 years, in my case. But I don't. We are around, surrounded about a lot of mountains, and we have 2 volcanoes, one live volcano, and it's very dangerous. It's very close to our city. Well, a lot of sightings was reported precisely around of the volcano. Then at the north of the airport and north of the city, and between 2 points, one named Pachuca and the other is San Mateo. The others, and the most dangerous, was reported at 5 miles in the final course of the runway. That is over the city. Greater, I think. And a Mexican pilot has had a terrified experience with 3 objects that they flying around there, around them, and 2 of these objects flying on top of the wings of the aircraft, and the other fly in front of them in the cockpit cabin, then goes down and ¿cómo se dice golpear? Hitting the aircraft, the small aircraft. We have, or until I know, the radar registered that information, have registered about that information, and had the information about the objects in another place, then close to the aircraft, then only one object, and in that moment precisely the pilot reports that he can't control where all the aircraft, the movement. I mean, apparently these objects is taking him to somewhere, I don't know. But fortunately for us, or for them, they live in his aircraft and the pilot very close to the volcanoes, precisely. That is where we are around 140 controllers on the Mexico Center. And I think that 50 at least, we have been information about objects and a screen and a visual contact with them. We have a very funny visual contact. We have 2 Mexican aircrafts flying bound to coming from the north to the airport, flying to land. When one of them reports to have inside a small object of red color flying faster and passing beside him very, very fast. And the aircraft that was flying behind of the first reports to have another more inside. When that happened, we count with 1 minute to have it inside, and a lot of people run to to the windows to see that, to try at least to watch this phenomenon, and they have a visual contact with these three different objects, different color. Was what red, and the other two white, I think, but very so bright. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, sorry. Yeah, and around 32 controllers have the same sighting, the same phenomenon inside, and have a. We are in Mexico. We are 4 control centers and 52 airports, and in the 4 control centers, we have been taking information about this kind of phenomenon. Of course, in the 4 centers. Monterrey, yes, in the 4. In Monterrey, on Mérida, and Mazatlan. Mazatlan, we have an information about that around 15 years ago, and 2 commercial flights and another private aircraft, but an executive aircraft, flying in Mazatlan aerospace, very close for with the border, with the United States, the border. Information about of 4 or 5 objects flying around there, and they turns to be scared some way, and they decide finally to land on Mazatlan. They don't consider as safety the airspace in that moment. That's why I said. But our Mexican authorities had a lot of information about the pilots and controllers' reports of UFOs in our country.
You know
About it, and I'm sure about, and I think, almost sure, that your country has information, because all the controllers on the world are victims in some way of this kind of phenomena, and the pilots also. And I'm sure that in your country, a lot of controllers have been information about pilots' report and reports and sightings of pilots, and definitely they have been taking information in his screams, I'm sure. Well, perhaps be the Sara Cuevas case. This lady had a sighting with his camera at the same time that we have a detection on a radar screen 40 miles from that point, at the same time. And we receive information for different sources, yes, about that sighting. That's happened on Metepec. And after that, we have a very busy week with sightings each day for a week. And then we have the trouble with the Aeromexico Flight 109 that had a crash with an unknown object in the World Trade Center. But some pilots have been sighting when these objects of flying saucers flying or going down in the volcano, inside of the volcano. But our radar, and at the same time, like in other radars in the world, doesn't detect light. Only objects, solid objects flying. That is very important. And that when you have information about pilots, controllers, or people walking in the street, at the same time of the same object, same moment, definitely you are talking about a sighting, very real. Well, on the point, really, the important thing for me and for the professional guys like me is that they represent a traffic and control traffic and very dangerous traffic for our aircrafts and any places of the world. That is very important for us and results to be just a traffic, unknown traffic, but at least traffic. That's yes. We have registered information about or 12 or 15 echoes at the same time. At the same time, and that is very dangerous. Yes, very close to the town and to the airport also. In a dangerous way because we have a lot of airbornes and landings and a lot of traffic crossing our area. It is very dangerous in a visual way and instrument way is the same. In his film has around of 50 small objects. Well, it is very important. If our radar it doesn't have detection after 40,000, this object was filmed very close to the airport. That's at 3.5 miles because we have checking that. And the people has visual contact with this kind of objects. Can you imagine the size of these objects? And like our civil aircrafts, we have two or, well, for example, on a Boeing 727, we have 150 souls flying. Well, taking in account this kind of similar condition and the size of these objects, well, you have 1,000 of people there, no? No, the pilots reports the size of these objects around 100 meters or greater. This is important. For example, I remember reports of Mexican aircraft flying from Veracruz to Mexico to have inside an object over the el volcano named Pico de Orizaba. Another pilot flying behind around 40 miles behind of the aircraft, the first aircraft, has the same object inside. And they are talking about that it was enormous. They don't say, but well, if you have two aircrafts watching the same phenomenon, and between 40 miles between the aircrafts, the object was enormous, biggest. I don't know.
I joined the Navy in April of 1969. I attended Radio A school in Bainbridge, Maryland. Then I reported to the USS John F. Kennedy, which was CBA 67 at the time, which was already on a deployment to the Mediterranean. I caught up with it there. I worked in the communications section for a few years, and then I moved to the navigational section of the Kennedy, where I was working with the quartermasters. I did administrative work for the navigator. After that, I was transferred to Commander Fighter Wing 1 at Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I, 79, I applied for a job at the National Security Agency as a security guard and was hired in 1980. Did that job for 3 years, and then I moved to the electrical division under the General Services Administration at Fort Meade, Maryland. In 1986, I became, they did away with all the GSA services, so I became an actual NSA employee in 1986 and worked in the facilities section at NSA until my termination in June 13th, 1997, which was Friday the 13th. The incident occurred on the USS John F. Kennedy. I'm not sure the exact date. It was in the summer of 1971. It more than likely was June or end of June or first part of July. The reason why I remember, at the time of the incident, I was working in the communications section of the Kennedy. My job was a broadcast operator, which meant that I retrieved messages from a series of teletypes that received fleet broadcasts to the fleet from the communication stations in the Atlantic. We were in the southern Atlantic. We had been performing an operational readiness exercise in and around Cuba and in the Caribbean Sea in preparation. Well, the war games, the Navy, all the military do these exercises from time to time to keep proficiency up. We had just completed this exercise, and we were getting ready to head back to Norfolk. And the evening that the incident occurred, they had just finished a long flight ops in excess of 18 hours. So most of the crew had just gone below decks after a rather long flight ops, and they were pretty tired, so they went below. I was on duty in the communications room, and the teletypes were, of course, they were crypto. All the communications came through cryptographic equipment, which was very susceptible to interference from time to time. So I kept a close watch on the incoming messages, and if I noticed any abnormalities, I would call facilities control and have them adjust the receivers to keep the signals clear. This particular night, I took a message off the teletype and filed it because it was not to us, and I turned around to check the teletypes again and saw something I had never seen before, and that was that all 8 teletypes were just typing complete garbage, totally incoherent. I had seen 1 or 2, mistakes in the messages, but never anything this extensive. So I immediately called the facilities control on the intercom to inform them that my broadcasts were out, and they informed me that they were busy because all communications had just gone out, ship-wide. And this had never occurred before in my time. Of course, I had. A few seconds later, we heard we had an intercom and a pneumatic tube system that went between the communications room to the signal bridge, which was located on the very top of the island structure of the carrier. And we heard a voice come on, very excited, yelling that God was here. It was the end of the world. And we looked at each other and thought, well, that's strange. What's going on there? Another few seconds went by, and another voice came on, more controlled. This person said that there's something over the ship, is what he said. There's something over the ship. Well, I looked at a friend of mine, a shipmate, and he looked at me, and we decided to go have a look, which was really breaking the rules. We weren't supposed to leave the comm area during watch, but nothing was working anyway, so we figured, being young. So we exited the communication center and went to the catwalk on the port side of the ship, on the flight deck, edge of the flight deck, and we observed a large glowing sphere over the island structure of the ship, over the ship. It was hard to decide what size this thing was because there was no perspective. It was late in the evening. The sun had gone down. It was twilight, but it looked huge. I would say anywhere from 300 or 400 feet to a quarter of a mile, depending on how high it was. If it was high and it was huge, it glowed in a pulsating manner between a yellowish and an orangish color. I couldn't see any details other than a glowing spherical object. Unfortunately, I only got to observe this object for less than 30 seconds because by the time we got out there and started looking at it, general quarters went off on the ship, battle stations, and we had to go back to our watch station, which was our battle stations. We stayed at general quarters or battle stations for about 2 hours. It was only several minutes after we got back to the communications center that the messages started coming in again. Incoming started coming in. Outgoing was still out. So it wasn't that long we were out of communications, maybe 20 minutes at the most. Of course, I stayed on watch until my watch ended, which was at midnight. After that, I talked to a few friends, some shipmates that I had on the ship. One in particular worked in the radar department, and he was on watch during the incident, and he told me that all the radar screens were glowing and nothing. They couldn't detect anything on radar. And we stayed up most of the night talking about it. A few friends of mine and we heard stories about the compasses not working on the bridge, and that the radar navigational system had gone offline. For instance, I heard from some people that the first voice on the intercom that we heard yelling, saying it was the end of the world, was actually a bosun's mate lookout that was on watch on the signal bridge. We heard through stories that this person had to be sedated, was very upset, and we heard that the second voice that we heard was actually a signalman that was on watch on the signal bridge, the one that said it was just something over the ship, the more controlled voice. A few days later, the commanding officer and the executive officer came on the closed circuit television system that we had on board. It was the only way they could address the crew of 5,000. His speech, he looked at the camera, and I'll never forget this. He looked at the camera and he said, "I would like to remind the crew that certain events that take place on board a major naval combatant vessel are considered classified and should not be discussed with anyone without any to know." Unquote. That's all he said. He didn't say we had to. So that the commanding officer and the executive officer were pretty upset during the incident because they had no control over anything, and they were very vulnerable, which I'm sure was upsetting for any military people when you're not in control. The propulsion system still worked. We could maintain the speed and course. We could steer, but from all the stories that I heard, anything that was electronic in nature ceased to operate or was malfunctioning. This included any computer systems. It did at the time have nuclear weapons on board. This was a known fact to us, but we were in the Mediterranean. We were not supposed to talk about it because weapons, but they weren't going to deploy a carrier anywhere in the world without nuclear capabilities. But the altitude of the object appeared to be pretty low. Now, I did get a message from a former serviceman, U.S. Navy serviceman, that said he was on a destroyer in the vicinity and that they had tracked an object on radar in sometime that summer. Now, he couldn't remember. I also got a message from a man that had been a sailor on the ship, had worked with the computers, and he remembered somebody getting him up to come and work on reboot the computer system. And he had said what happened, and they said a UFO was over the ship, and he laughed it off, thought it was a joke. And he just chalked it up to a computer crash and rebooted the system. And it didn't, it wasn't until he read my story that he remembered that, and he said, well, they weren't joking. But all this time, he thought it was just a joke. And witnesses, it was only actually over the ship for maybe 5 minutes or less. However, the ramifications of the disruptions lasted for at least an hour. That's why we stayed at battle stations for 2 hours. I guess they were waiting to see if it came back, and they were still trying to restart systems and get things back and fully operational. It took them probably at least an hour, and then there was probably a buffer zone there. There were no aircraft in the air. They were all on board when the incident started. They kept 2 F-4 Phantoms, which were called already CAP, Combat Air Patrol. From what I heard, they would not operate. They were trying to start those jets, and from what I heard, the rumors and the stories that they wouldn't start, that they were out of it. Observed no noise from the object. It was quiet on the flight deck at the time because I said there was no flying, no aircraft running. So it was rather quiet. We discerned no sound whatsoever, no humming, nothing, just a complete silence.
What was the size of it?
Rotate a little bit this way, a little bit crooked. A little bit more, just a little bit more. A little bit more, there we go.
Okay. This just states that I was a broadcast operator, and it was during that time period. Can't see the dates. Yeah, 1 March 70, 1 September 70 to 1 March 71. Okay. Okay. The officer that gave me my evaluation,
February 71.
right, Lieutenant Commander Gorham. That's his name.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll have to crop it. Okay, can you rotate? Hold just the bottom of it so I can get the top, or this is 86.
Yeah.
Maybe a little more clockwise.
Some men arrived on the ship when we returned to Norfolk to interview some people in suits. Lord knows where they came from, what agency they were from. But I had heard it. Because I wasn't a legitimate observer, I wasn't even supposed to be out there. I guess nobody really knew I saw it. But I'm sure the rumor I heard that all the bridge crew, people that were on the bridge, were interviewed by these gentlemen in suits, and some people in some operational areas, radar, and we had an organization on the ship called IOIC, and it was Integrated Operations Intelligence Communications, something to that effect. I remember the acronym, but I don't remember the exact meaning. And I'm sure I had heard that they were out taking pictures of this thing. I'm convinced that there's something to it. I'm convinced that the government, somebody in the government knows a lot more than we know. I have my own theories of why it's being hidden. I think it's the reason that the information is being kept from the public is there are many reasons, not just one particular reason.
What would those be?
They probably feel that the general public couldn't handle the knowledge of extraterrestrials visiting. I think that they have information that would seriously undermine the economy of the country. I think there's devices that they have that could produce energy at very low cost and with no pollution. But the corporate greed would prohibit that. And that would be the part that would bother me most about the cover-up. I would think of all the pollution there is and all that could have been saved. That would bother me more than anything. And also, I think anytime the military discovers something like this, they want to keep it quiet because they don't know who knows about it. And there's a paranoia in the military. I've seen it. Oh, definitely. It's definitely time to make this disclosure on this. It's been kept secret too long. I think we have a right to know what we have to face, be it an asteroid heading for Earth or an extraterrestrial visitor. I think as human beings, we have the right to know what our future may bring. It's a God-given right. I think what I was observing was the underside of possibly a disk, which would cause it to look spherical from my vantage point. I've thought about it a lot, and that's the conclusion I've come to. It wasn't a bright glow. Like I said, it pulsated between yellow and orange. It wasn't.
Went on to the University of Virginia, where I received a PS degree. At graduation, I had participated in ROTC, so at that point I was commissioned in the regular Army, and was commissioned second lieutenant in the regular Army, and consequently 39, we were living in the same house outside of Langley Field, which at that time had a large facility of NACA, which was the predecessor of NASA, the National Advisory Committee of Aeronautics. I was used to hearing airplanes fly over the house all the time. But this one night, it was probably around 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I heard this swishing noise come by the house. And it was fast, but it was so totally unique and strange that it made an impression on me. I had no idea what it was until I began hearing about some of the Foo Fighters in Germany that had come out that were jet propelled. And I could draw a correlation between the two very easily. I would suspect it was Japan. After the war was over, we began bringing a lot of things back from overseas. I remember they brought a German U-boat to Fort Monroe, to the piers at Fort Monroe. And during the same period of time, NACA had an open house one weekend. And I headed over to NACA to one of the wind tunnels because I'm interested in aircraft and all. And in the wind tunnel was what I described as a flying saucer. There was no doubt about the form of the craft that was there. 25, 35 feet in diameter, probably 4 or 5 feet in depth and thickness, but then it just tapered down on the ends. But I got as close to it as maybe 10 feet, and it was on a pedestal. It was propped up. And I thought, that is a strange craft. And this was before the UFO interest began developing. But this had been brought back from Germany, and it was in the wind tunnel. My curiosity was, how is this maneuvered? One section of the slant had a plexiglass canopy over it. And from what I was told, whoever was the pilot would lie down prone and fly this craft from a prone position, and the plastic was over the edge of the flying saucer. And I could say, average pilot could get in. As to how it was propelled, I don't know. I don't remember seeing exhaust. There were no propellants. It wasn't one of those lighter than aircraft by any means. There was no visible means of propulsion. So I always took a camera with me whenever I went up. This one particular afternoon, I'd been up probably a half an hour, and I monitored the airport and the tower to make sure that, I was not getting in anybody's way. I usually flew at around 2,000 feet because it's legal minimums over populated areas. And I happened to catch his transmission from the tower, and I don't know who he was talking to. He didn't talk to me particularly, but I monitored it. And so there was a disc-shaped object coming in from the west. And I thought, well, this is a pretty good opportunity. I'll take a look and see if I could see it. And I guess now, if I would estimate altitude somewhere, probably not less than 50,000 feet and on up. So I called the tower after they were making people alert of what was coming over the area. And the tower said, what do you want to do? And I said, if you don't mind, would you release me from 2,000, let me go to 12, which was my maximum altitude without oxygen. And they said, well, go right ahead. And it took me several minutes to climb from 2 to 12. And I got up, and about that time, this silver ball was passing over. And I took a number of shots on 35 millimeter film as it was going over. And next thing I knew, it was gone. And after I got down, I asked what happened, and they said, well, they had alerted the fighters at Langley to go up and take a look at what it was, and by the time they could get scrambled and get in the air and get to that altitude, it was gone. But since I was working at a station that was owned by the newspaper, I felt free to go to the newspaper, into the photo lab, and I said, I'm really curious as to what we've got here. And if you don't mind, let's develop this film right now. So gave it to the photographer in charge, who was a friend. He developed it. And you could see the silver ball in the picture. And I said, well, let's carry it a little bit further. If you don't mind, let's magnify this. Let's blow it up. Finally, we blew it up. I don't know how many times we blew it up until we got to the point where the silver ball filled the whole frame of an 8 by 10. It was fuzzy, but it was a magnification of what we had just taken. And after we magnified it, it wasn't a circular ball anymore. It was a football-shaped object, more like a cigar-shaped object. It came to points on either end. I didn't make it known to anybody, but somehow somebody knew I had it, and I got a call probably about 6-8 weeks later. And they said, we're into this area of gathering information on possible UFOs and things like that, and understand that you took some pictures. Nor would you mind loaning them to us so that we could, just take a look. And I didn't ask for credentials or anything like that. And I said, well, in addition to pictures, I also have kind of an interesting collection of news items that have come over AP for the past, 5-10 years even. Maybe not that long, probably 5 years. And I said, we'll bring those along. We'd like, we're interested, and we'd like to look at that. And they gave me an address over in the Fan District in Richmond. It was one of the older homes. I went in, and the man that had called me introduced himself and said, we're real grateful if you bring these over. We'll take good care of them and get them back to you. And I know. Didn't say who he was with, never identified himself, and never told me who he was. Just very, very normal. The house was not furnished as though it was a home. It was very lightly furnished. It was an older home and didn't have anything in it of any value, as I recall. No antiques and no oriental rugs or anything. And in fact, it was kind of shabby. And it kind of made me curious as to what he did and who else was in the house. But I turned it over to him, and I thought, well, I'll call me when you finished, or else I'll come back and get it. And he didn't call me for, I don't know, like 2-3 weeks. Well, that's enough time. And since I didn't hear from him, I didn't have his telephone number. I thought I'd go on back to the house and pick it up. Well, I went back to the house, and the house was empty. There was nobody there. I have no idea who the person was. I was very naive. And more so because I didn't keep a negative on it. And I didn't keep a print. These were original things that I had. And the newspaper didn't keep a copy either, because when we did that, we were just doing it for our own interest. It wasn't for print or publication. And they disappeared from my life forever.
Do you remember the man's name?
It was large enough for me to see it from many, many miles away. And
You don't think it?
this was a clear day. I think it was like an evening in June or July when the weather was very tranquil. And the direction of flight was just so direct that there was no floating around. It had a course, and it was sticking directly to it, whatever it was. And from I could see it, but it was above the horizon, so it could have been at least 100 miles or more away. And it was over me from the time I'd go to 2 to 12,000 feet. And by the time I got up there, before the jets could scramble and get in the air, it was gone. A lot of people who have had experiences And for a while, there seemed to be a concerted effort to ridicule whoever it was that made mention of anything. And like, it's like a lot of things in life now. Disclosure is not being ridiculed anymore. I don't feel the least bit uneasy about talking about things. Went to the Pentagon for a job interview. The major that was interviewing me brought up this subject. It had nothing to do with what I was. He said, if, for example, life exists in other domains, do you believe that the people who existed in that area would have a closer relationship to God than we do because of our limited intelligence and insight? And these people obviously are far more advanced than we are. With their advancement in technology and science, provide them a close relationship with their higher power. And I thought, what's that got to do with what we're talking about? I'm coming here interviewing for a military job. And we just kind of left it at that. I said, yes, obviously, I think so. The answer to that would, in my opinion, would be certainly. And we began talking about flying saucers, and I got the typical nebulous but not evasive answers. And one of the things he interviewed, and this goes back quite a while. Now, there are certain things that do remain in my memory very vividly. And we were talking about different aircraft and UFOs, and we were kind of blending the subject in together very nicely. And I said, what about aircraft in the future? What are they going to be like? And he said, we have aircraft now. He says, we have vehicles or aircraft now that we could actually fly, but they are so unique and so unorthodox that the public was not conventional. No, I guess he was referring to the fact no rudder, no tail, no wings or whatever, that we don't even bother putting them out because the director of NASA at Langley. I'm trying to date this to the best of my ability, around 56, 57, something like that. I was stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky. A lot of the talk that went around Fort Knox was of a P-51 that had scrambled before I got there. Went up after an object that had appeared on radar, and the tower had asked him to go up. The P-51 went up, began describing what he had seen, and then disappeared. They never found it. I don't know whether they found pieces of the aircraft, but I don't recall that they even found pieces of the aircraft. I was at Fort Knox up until 11 o'clock one night, and then got in my car and drove to Fort Campbell, where I had some collateral duties also. Got into Fort Campbell about 1 o'clock in the morning. There was a little diner that stayed open all night. And as I went to the diner for coffee and donuts that night before I went back to the barracks, I noticed it was pretty full. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And the MPs were in town. And I said, what's going on? Have had an accident, aircraft down or something like that? And no, everybody's really excited that a flying saucer had landed behind a nearby farmhouse. And from bits and pieces, I was just trying to pull in as much as I could. And they said, you can't get there because they've got it cordoned off. The MPs have totally surrounded the property. And from what we've gotten from the scene at this point, which is like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, was that this flying saucer had landed. The creatures in the flying saucer had jumped over the house and had landed in the front of the house. The people in the house were frightened to death, absolutely going bananas. One of them grabbed a shotgun, and as one of the creatures went up to the front door to investigate, he fired a shotgun through the screen door. At that, people or the creatures from the flying saucer decided this was not a very good place to be. So they ran back out, but before they jumped back over the house, went to the back wherever the flying saucer was located, and took off and disappeared. MPs were there, and I'm sure this is in a military report somewhere. If they were from Fort Campbell, because this is the nearest base, and the ones that were outside were from the base also. So they were from Fort Campbell, and it was probably an hour police, because the state police were out there also. So if we had to track this, it was in the Louisville Courier Journal, and with somebody out there attempting to ridicule everything that's done, it makes it difficult to do a story and have a credible reaction to it when somebody else out there, like politicians are doing now, trying to find fault with precise words and any innuendos or anything else. So I think a lot of the people who choose stories now look at it, I think, from a monetary point of view. If I was responsible for the budget, and I think there's some sort of an embargo somewhere down the line that you don't mention this, let's just pass on it.